6:03. Good morning, board members and the staff and attending public. I'd like to call to the order of today's meeting. And Secretary Robert Pearman, again, roll call.
All right, thank you. Tian Fang,
Here.
Brett Gladstone. Brett Gladstone. Pascual Gutierrez.
Here.
Sylvia Kwan. Sylvia Kwan. Ebony Lewis.
Here.
Robert
Sorry.
Harriman. Was that Sylvia?
Yeah, I forgot to unmute. Sorry. Present. Okay.
Ronald Jones.
Present.
Nilza Serrano. Nilza Serrano. Sonny Ward.
Here.
All right. Did they think Brett was on the call and just didn't open up?
This is the
So we're
moderator.
missing.
This is the moderator. I'd be happy to manually unmute him to see if he's online. Would you like me to do that?
Yes, please, just for the record.
Could you give me instructions? Could you give me instructions on how I can hear you and you can see me? Because I can see you and hear you, but I'm calling from an outside phone and I'm not able to speak or be seen, but I can see all of you.
So if the board would be happy, I'd be more than happy to display how he can connect his call-in with his computer device, if you would like to give me that moment.
Brett, check if he can have a secure voice connection, will be okay too.
Hello?
So
There it
currently
is.
he is showing as a call-in user, I believe, and I have no way of promoting that call-in line to a panelist, so he's going to have to connect his two audio devices.
Yeah, go ahead. If you, after 3 minutes, let's switch back to meeting. We'll give 3 minutes. Okay.
So Brett Gladstone, I don't know if you're able to hear us, but being displayed is how to connect your audio device to your computer device. Brett, this is the moderator. Were you able to connect your audio device? If so, can you please unmute your microphone and conduct a microphone check? Since you did call in, you will have to use your computer to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
I have an echo.
You're going to want to turn down the volume on your computer so it doesn't pick it up.
How about now?
That is better.
Okay, but you still can't see me, but let's go on like this. Go ahead. Sorry for the delay.
Okay. Brett, you may want to mute your microphone often as well. Okay. Let's move to agenda number 3. That pursue the provisions of a Governor Newsom's Executive Order N2920, dated March 17, 2020. A physical meeting location is not being provided. And with us today also have a chair from LATC, John Radensky. And today will be last official meeting that our dear member Pascal Gutierrez last meeting, and I think he will continue participate our activities at the committee and other occasions through NCOV and otherwise. But I just want to take a moment to thank him for his long tenure, long service, very distinguished contribution, and you can name them in few areas. So with that said, the board decided to issue a letter of commendation to recognize his contribution. And our executive director has this framed, but we cannot physically live stream the flag to you, Pascal. We just want to recognize verbally here, and you will receive that letter of commendation through mail. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tian. It's greatly appreciated.
And as my special guest, you can also say something if you want to take this opportunity.
I'll try and keep it brief because they say that the thrill is in the journey and not in the arrival. It seems like that's where I'm at now. So it's been a very rewarding experience. I've had the pleasure, honor, and privilege of working with board members and all of you, the latest batch of gangsters, which and I'm sure you'll all carry on in a stellar manner and do the good work that we're doing for both the California consumer as well as helping and assisting with the architectural profession and being the best that they can be. So thank you all very much. The best of luck to all of you and much success.
Well, may I say something, Tian?
Okay, that is special, but it's okay. It's always nice.
Tian, I mean, Pascal, you were there when I first started, and you've been there the whole time that I've been a board member. I've learned so much from you. You sort of taught me what being a true volunteer is like. And also the amount of knowledge that you carry around in your head is absolutely astounding. I don't know how you keep everything that you know and share with us over these years. So I want to show you my special appreciation by thanking you from the bottom of my heart. And I hope to see you around quite a bit more.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Okay.
Pascal, stay with PQ committee.
Good.
If you want to keep him busy, I can call for more meetings PQs during this year. Any other members has need to say something now, or I can move on?
Yeah, I'll say something really quick. Pascal, you were also here prior to me joining the board, and being that I'm not an architect, I have learned so much from you, and thank you for everything. And even from just, driving back from meetings from SLO and like driving in the middle of California and learning, just to use maps instead of like your phone and just going by your feel and your stories of your family. So just thank you so much for all that you have contributed to all of us, and especially for me. It's remarkable that like how long you've served, and it's crazy how time flies because I feel like I just joined. So yeah, thank you for everything.
Thank you, everybody.
I'd like
Bob
to say
Bob Pearman, I concur in all that, Pascal. Good luck to you. All the best.
Thank you much, Carlos.
I'd like to say something. This is Nilsa.
Yes, please.
Pascual, I'm going to definitely miss you and your guidance and your support on everything. I think that this board has not only benefited from you, but I have gained a friend in you for sure. You have been a steadfast advocate, and consumers in California should know that you do your homework, you dot your I's, you cross your T's, and you always do the right thing for the California Architects Board. So I personally thank you for all you've done. I'm glad to call you a friend, and I look forward to working with you for years to come.
Thank you, Nielsa. Amigos for life.
That's right.
Great. That's very nice tribute. Pascal, thank you. As I think it's fair, I can represent the full board, not just a colleague, but a friend and advisor. Okay, we wish you luck, and we will keep you busy at PQ committee, as I promised. Okay, the next agenda item is, well, before we move to...
Mr. President, this is Michael Knoch, your legal counsel. Forgive me for interrupting, but we will need to take public comment after each agenda item.
That's right. Before I move, I am thinking about doing that. Okay. So public comment will start after I make this notes that all motions and the second will be repeated for the record, and the votes on all motions will be taken by roll call. So that's voice is important. And with that said, before we move moving to next agenda item, any attending public have any comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to request public comment, for your reference being displayed on the screen are instructions. You can click on the question mark within the square located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen and type, "I would like to comment." All commenters will be given 2 minutes. As a reminder to the panel, if you are currently not speaking, please mute your microphones as to eliminate the interference that we're currently hearing. At this time, it does not appear we have any requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please.
Feature has been closed.
Okay. So item number C is update from the Department of Consumer, DCA, and we are glad, as usual, our deputy directors here, Carrie Holmes, will give us an update personally. Thank you, Carrie. Take on.
Good morning, Board President Feng and board members. I am Carrie Holmes, Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations at the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for allowing me to provide a department update to the board. I would like to thank Board Member Gutierrez for his many years of service on the board as his grace period comes to an end this month. His departure will create a vacancy on the board for a licensee, so individuals interested in serving should apply through the Governor's Appointments website or through DCA's Board Member Resources page. Big shoes to fill. After more than a year of this pandemic, California plans to reopen fully on June 15th, just next week. California will keep existing mask guidance in place until June 15th, when it will align with CDC guidance for members of the public. However, workplaces and some other settings may have different requirements for health and safety. Employees and visitors must still wear masks while at DCA locations for the time being. Californians need to remain vigilant and continue public health prevention measures, like wearing masks where appropriate and getting vaccinated. DCA will communicate any updated guidance to boards and bureaus as soon as possible. DCA is receiving many questions about when and how boards will meet again in person. I don't have a definitive answer today for all the details, but I would like to offer some clarification. As you know, the ability of the board to meet remotely, as we're doing today, is tied to the governor's executive orders and state of emergency. When these are lifted, the board will be required to follow all aspects of the Open Meetings Act, including publicly noticed and accessible locations. We do not yet know exactly when this will happen or if any changes in the law will occur before that date to allow remote options. DCA will do all it can to assist the boards and bureaus to transition safely and with enough time to plan for those in-person meetings. Boards and bureaus are also looking ahead to what changes can be made on a permanent basis for efficiency and employee well-being, such as eliminating paper processes, maximizing telework where appropriate, and utilizing remote meetings. I encourage all members and the public to visit DCA's COVID-19 webpage for updates and resources on the state's reopening plan, public health guidance, vaccinator resources, vaccine distribution, and more. For current board members, 2021 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year. This means all employees and board members are required to complete the training this year. As a reminder, newly appointed and reappointed board members will be required to attend board member orientation training within a year of appointment or reappointment. DCA is excited about the new and improved training, which has been updated based on board member feedback and requests. The next training is on June 23rd on WebEx. To register, please visit the DCA Board Member Resource Center at dca.ca.gov. Finally, I'd like to update you on 2 initiatives launched by DCA Director Kirkmeyer for 2021 to enhance DCA services to all boards and bureaus. The Executive Officer Cabinet has been maintaining regular communication, providing feedback and information to DCA, and assisting with special projects that impact all boards and bureaus. The group has met several times and is making progress on projects such as standardizing board reporting requirements. The Enlightened Licensing Work Group helps individual boards and bureaus streamline and make their licensing processes more effective and efficient by utilizing best practices, information technology, and cost-saving measures. The work group has begun a deep dive into the licensing process at the Board of Registered Nursing, with process improvements being implemented in real time. We will continue to update you as these initiatives progress. As always, Board and Bureau Relations is here to help. If there's anything we can do to assist, please reach out. This concludes my presentation, and I'll hand it back over to Board President Feng.
Thank you, Carrie, for this important update. I think for the time being, we still have an option if needed for a remote meeting like this, as my understanding. So that's good. And I guess if it's not exchange, any questions, perhaps we can get a quick answer if you do have any from Director Holmes.
Sure. May I ask a question? So, so what you just presented is obviously a little bit of a question for me, and that is that we had heard originally, of course, that by June 15th, everything was going to more or less go back to normal, which would, in my mind, meant that the September board meeting would probably be in person. You have cast some doubt on that. So do you have any idea when you might be able to let us know a more definitive answer?
Sure. So it does seem likely that fall meetings will be able to be in person. I think there's still what's up in the air is more the ability to continue with some remote options. Right now, the state of emergency and executive orders are not all being lifted right on June 15th, which means that boards will be able to look at continuing with remote, possibly doing hybrid models. And so DCA is really working to figure out what are the best models that can be used so that everyone can be healthy, safe, comfortable. It's pretty tricky to put together a hybrid model, but that's looking like a possibility. There may be changes in the law that would allow for that on a permanent basis, but it's just not entirely clear yet what will happen.
Yeah, I'm also aware of, I'm also part of other committees and boards and organizations that are looking at hybrid models, and it's definitely not easy. So hopefully you'll find a good happy medium.
Thank you. I see Brett's hand up.
Brett, yeah, go ahead.
I think, did he freeze?
Brett, do you want to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. You've used the term hybrid model, but could you define what that means? I don't know what that means.
Sure. So I think what some boards are looking at and the kinds of solutions that are being discussed are, if there's some allowance for remote ongoing, it may be that some board members would be in person. Maybe there's one that wouldn't be, or maybe members of the public would like to attend remotely, but the board will be in person. There's a lot of different ways that it could look, and the intent is to make sure that we continue this increased access that we've seen to the public with remote options, while also not sacrificing that in-person camaraderie that really develops with the board that you can't replace. So hopefully some flexibility will be possible, and it's just not entirely clear what the law will allow at this point.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So the Enlighten Licensing Project, explain that. Is the intent to get to every department in DCA eventually? Or is it just that people can pick up lessons learned from any particular department that's being looked at currently, or what?
So I think ideally any board or bureau that would like to have that deep dive look at their processes should be able to. I don't know the timeline for that. And then I think, as you said, lessons learned will be shared as well, so that other programs can learn from what those first boards are doing for process improvements.
And so is Ms. Zuniga in all the meetings, or is it just certain people in the meetings, not necessarily every department, so to speak, every board?
No, it's not everyone. There is a group of folks that are from boards and bureaus, and then also from IT, from organizational improvement, experts on various parts of the licensing process that are helping to make some of these changes in real time. And then we do, with all of the executive officers, we put on brown bag discussions, and I'm guessing that as we get those lessons learned from this first round of Enlightened Licensing, that may be a topic where all of the executive officers would come together and discuss licensing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Carrie, you mentioned the brown bag. I found the brown bag was very helpful. Is that extended to full board members, or just me, the president?
At this point, they originally were only available to the executive officers, and then we included board presidents and vice presidents in one brown bag, and the reception was so good that we have extended it for each brown bag. I don't believe we've talked about including all board members, but it's definitely something that I can bring back for a discussion, because I do know how interested everyone is. It might be tricky to have full boards participating if then it becomes a meeting as well. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just want to let you know that the brown bag was so helpful. Yeah. Okay, great.
Glad to hear it.
Thank you again, Director Holmes, and we look forward to next meeting. You or your staff will give us another update. Next meeting, so you know, we are planning on doing strategic planning. Which is one meeting earlier compared with all other years. I like to try something different. So most likely, hopefully, it's an in-person meeting. So, you know. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Mike, our attorney, we have another public comment period. Do we need this one too?
President Feng, we do need to take public comment after each item. It's a very particular requirement of the Open Meetings Act. So,
very good.
Moderator,
could you open the public comment form and ask the public if any comments regarding the items not on agenda today?
We're doing it for this particular agenda item, correct? Or are we doing it for agenda item D, which is public comment not on the agenda?
Moderator, this is Michael. We should do it for agenda item C. Realize
Okay.
we'll be doing public comment right after, but they're two different items.
Just wanted to make sure I was correct. This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up for public comment on agenda item C, which is the update on the Department of Consumer Affairs.
We may want, sorry, Michael and the moderator, can we open both? Comment for C and also comment for D as a one session.
Yes, moderator, this is Michael. Perhaps we can just go ahead and leave that open when we move on to item D.
Okay. So this is the moderator, and once again, we are taking public comment for items C and D. The update from the Department of Consumer Affairs and public comment for items not on the agenda. If you would like to make a public comment, for your reference being displayed on the screen are instructions. You can request public comment by clicking on the question mark within the square located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen and typing, "I would like to make a comment." All commenters will be provided 2 minutes. Upon the end of your time, you will be muted, and I will move on to the next request for public comment. I will now pause momentarily to allow individuals time to access this feature. It does not appear at this time we've received any requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please.
Feature has been closed.
Now we are on agenda item E, review and possible actions on February 26, 2020 board meeting minute. Any members really have reviewed the meeting minutes, want make a motion?
This is Nilsa Serrano. I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Any comments, exceptions before we turn to public comments? Here now, we will move to public comment. On this item.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to request public comment, for your reference being displayed on the screen are instructions. I will pause momentarily to allow individuals time to access this feature. At this time, we have not received any requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please.
Feature has been closed.
So the motion is made by Nilsa and the second by Albany, right? Albany is the second. Okay. Mr. Secretary, can we take a roll call?
Certainly. Jen Fang,
Yes.
Brett Gladstone,
Yes.
Pascual Gutierrez, so is his term all?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay, yeah. He got away. Sylvia Kwan, Ebony Lewis,
Aye.
Ronald Jones,
Yes.
Robert Pearman, aye. Nils Serrano, Sunny Ward,
Yes.
Sylvia, Nilsa. Spoke. Someone spoke?
This is Nilsa Serrano, yes.
The motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We move to agenda item F, and we ask Laura to Zuniga, of our director, to give update on Communications Committee.
Okay, thanks. Good morning. The Communications Committee met on March 25th, so I'm just going to give a brief update on the items. The board had referred, I think, 2 items for the committee's discussion. One of which was looking at creating tutorial videos similar to what we saw from LATC. So the committee approved that. And then the committee also discussed the revised outreach program objectives that the board discussed at the last meeting, which is where in a few years, I think it ended a few years ago, but the board used to have assigned schools and stakeholders to conduct outreach to on I think a quarterly basis. So the committee discussed it a little bit, but they didn't take any action. They want to discuss it at an in-person meeting. So I guess when communications can meet in person, they will take up that item. And then they talked about an update on their strategic plan objectives. They had an update from the Department of Consumer Affairs. And then discussed the meeting frequency and how they would like to meet more often. And so that will come up as well under the executive committee update. Are there any questions?
Just a comment, Laura. They mentioned the committee mentioned discussed how often the meeting, the outreach should be, and staff should do in terms of what kind of wide organization the staff may be more suitable to do. But as Laura mentioned, that nothing is specific yet. So I would ask Communication Committee to get something more concrete, so at the strategic plan meeting we can have more data or recommendations to discuss about. But the challenge is I don't know if we will have another meeting before a strategic session. So maybe something for Communication Committee and Executive Director to think about it. We have another meeting for that.
So, Tian, you'd like communications to meet before September so they can discuss it further?
Yeah, I think both items they need to give you more conclusive recommendations for the board to consider.
We also talked about converting some of our materials to Spanish as well, to be more equitable and inclusive. I didn't know that our materials and information for our consumers are only in English, which is odd to me that we wouldn't have it. So I think we need to continue that discussion of having, materials for our consumers also being translated in other languages.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, Ebony. So, I mean, there must be, Laura, there must be some kind of a state guidance for that type of communication.
I mean, there is a requirement, not specific to our publications, but I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that point. So DCA does provide translation services, and we can certainly put more, like, our publications into other languages. So we'll definitely work on that in the upcoming months. And also, a lot of them are now online, so it'll be a lot easier to update them and provide them in those other languages. So thank you.
So that's really good area to think about. Abby, thank you for mentioning that. So I give you an example. Our agency developed over the years policy of multimedia type of help. If the verbal, then you will get a free translation service of any language you ask for it. You contact our staff, and if the written, we do is depend the area we serve, because our system serves a different area, and we will provide up to 2 foreign language, 2 non-English languages to support that the equity concept that you teach. So yes, that's something that the Communication Committee can also make recommendations to the full board. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So there's no particular actions we need to make. I just recommend have one more communication committees meeting prior to strategic session, if possible. Let the staff make that decision. And with that said, we can open for public comment for this item as well. Item G.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to request public comment, you will be provided 2 minutes to make your comment. For reference, being displayed on your screen are instructions on how to request public comment. I will pause momentarily to allow individuals time to access this feature. It does not appear we've received any requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please, moderator.
You're very welcome. Feature's been closed.
Okay. Following is the agenda item H. It is Professional Qualification Committee's report, but we put the two separate information session in this report. First, we want to ask Heidi Lenser to give us a presentation of their analysis of last year's OPEC and about professional exam service, and some of the data and information may provide a meaningful background for the next subject, which is the mandatory continuing education requirement. And that one will be presented by Pascal. So let's start with Heidi, please.
Tian, this is Laura. If I could just interject, I think we skipped over the executive committee report, but we could take that up after, since we have outside presenters. So you want to take it up after?
Yeah,
we can take it up after the PQC item. Well, just to note that we'll return to it.
Sorry. Yeah, okay. We'll switch back to G after this.
Good morning. This is Heidi Lenser. I'm the Chief of the Office of Professional Examination Services, and I'm here this morning with one of my senior testing specialists, Roxandra Nunn, and we're going to give you a presentation on the Architect Occupational Analysis, and you have the report in your packet, I believe, and so Roxandra's going to give you a presentation. Roxandra is in charge of the CSE examination, working with your board to develop and publish that examination. So she's going to give you a presentation on the results of occupational analysis.
Good morning. This is Roxandra Nunn, and I will go ahead and present on the Architect Occupational Analysis results. And moderator, just a quick question. When I need a slide to be switched, do I just ask you? Next slide, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, next slide, please. So just an overview of what I'll be talking about with you today. I'm going to go over just briefly who is OPES, what we do, the exam development cycle, the occupational analysis process, the results from last year's occupational analysis on the architect profession, and then we'll open it up to any questions you may have. Next slide, please. So OPES, we provide consulting services in exam development and exam validation to DCA's boards, bureaus, and committees. And we, based on those validation and development analyses, we make recommendations, and we base those recommendations just on professional guidelines in the exam development field and technical standards related to licensure exams. Next slide, please. So some of the regulations, standards, and guidelines that we base our work on are the Business and Professions Code Section 139. So what that is it requires that boards conduct an occupational analysis for each exam every 5 to 7 years, and that boards submit a report every year indicating the status of the occupational analysis and exam development. BNP 139 also requires OPES to develop an exam validation policy for DCA licensing programs. So we also follow the principles for the validation and use of personnel selection procedures, and these are developed by the Society of IO Psychology. And those standards require that evidence of validity based on test content requires a thorough and explicit definition of the content domain of interest. In addition, a close link between the test content and the job content has to be demonstrated. And most importantly, actively practicing licensees serving as subject matter experts must be included in every step of the process. And lastly, we follow the standards for educational and psychological testing. Next slide, please. So licensure examinations, they provide a reliable method for identifying those who are able to practice safely and competently. We focus on entry-level tasks because that is who are taking the licensure examinations. And we need to make sure that they have the knowledge important for public protection. We use input from subject matter experts, or SMEs as we call them, and also we provide guidance as test specialists. So overall, the goal is to separate those who can safely practice architecture in California from those who can't. And the subject matter experts are selected by the board to represent the profession in terms of geographic location, experience, and specialty. And we make sure to include newly licensed SMEs in the entire exam development and occupational analysis process. Next slide, please. So here is an overview of the exam development cycle. So we start with the occupational analysis. And like I said, we do this every 5 to 7 years. And this is where we interview a group of subject matter experts, what is new in the field, what has changed in the past 5 to 7 years since the last occupational analysis was done. Basically, the goal is to stay as up to date in the field as possible. And based on all the information we gather from the subject matter experts, we develop a survey that we send out to all the licensees with an email address on file with the board. We send out a survey for them to complete. And the information we gather from the survey, we then refine and we come up with an exam outline. This exam outline serves as the blueprint for the exam. And I'll go a little bit more into that in some later slides, but this is just a brief overview of the process. And once we have a new exam outline or a test blueprint established, we start writing new items. We kind of fill in the blanks on the exam outline based on what the bank is looking like currently. If any new areas were established that weren't there previously, we make sure to write items for those areas. And throughout the process, we review existing items as well. When we administer exams, we are sent statistics from the test centers, from PSI. So they tell us how the licensees, how everybody who is taking the exam is performing, how the exam's performing, how each item is performing. We have statistics on all of that. And so based on the statistics that we get from PSI, we review items, we fix them, or we can even toss them and replace them with new ones. And we put out 4 forms per year. We send out 4 forms to PSI. We send out a spring form, a summer form, a fall form, and a winter form, so that if somebody does not pass the exam, let's say in March, and they retake the exam in September, they will have a different exam. They won't see the same exact exam that they took previously. So we get together and we construct that form, and then we determine the difficulty of that exam, and we set a passing score. Essentially, we just, depending on the difficulty of the exam of each item on that exam, we determine how many items should each candidate get right in order to pass the exam. So in a nutshell, that's the exam development process. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned, the OAs should be performed every 5 to 7 years. And that is because depending on the field, some fields have changes that are much more frequently than that. Other fields, changes are slower, but we want to make sure we capture all the significant changes in the profession, the scope of practice, if any equipment has been updated, technology, anything that is new, laws and regulations that have changed. We want to make sure we are up to date with all of those things. Next slide, please. So the occupational analysis provides a description of the current practice of an architect. And again, it provides the basis of the exams. The occupational analysis results in the exam blueprint that we use to develop the exam, and that process, everything that is involved in that process, makes our exams legally defensible, valid, and fair. And the way we determine validity is we link each exam item to critical job competencies. Okay, next slide, please. So the exam, the occupational analysis process, like I mentioned, we start with researching the profession, and we conduct telephone interviews with the subject matter experts. So I call each subject matter expert, and I just talk to them about their profession, what they do, what is new, what has changed. I have a whole list of questions that I ask them, and we typically do this with between 8 to 12 subject matter experts. And based on that, we get a good understanding of the practice and what has changed in the past 5 to 7 years. Based on that information, we develop a list of task statements and knowledge statements. So those are the tasks that architects perform on the job, and a list of knowledge, the knowledge that they have to know in order to perform those tasks. We then refine those lists of tasks and knowledge statements with subject matter experts in subsequent workshops. Once that list is refined, that is what we put in a survey, and we send out the survey with that list of task and knowledge statements to all licensees with email addresses on file in California. So what we ask them is, for each task, we ask them to tell us how frequently they perform that task, how important is it to the job of being an architect in California. And with the knowledge, similarly, we ask them how important is having this knowledge to your profession. We allow them several weeks to answer the survey. Once that time has passed, we gather all the data and we analyze the results. And then we have subsequent workshops with subject matter experts where we review the survey results. We talk about all the ratings that we received. We discuss whether any task statements receive such low ratings that we don't need to put them on the resulting outline, or whether we shouldn't delete anything. In this case, we did not remove any task statements or knowledge statements based on survey results. They were all very important and received high ratings from the survey, and so we kept everything on the exam outline that we developed. Next slide, please. So our survey was sent out to 21,590 licensees. These were all the licensees with email addresses on file with the board. Our overall response rate was about 10% of that. And then the final sample size was narrowed down to 7%. So the final sample size reflects two adjustments. First, we excluded data from respondents who indicated they were not currently licensed and practicing as architects in California. And then second, the questionnaires that contained a large volume of missing or unresponsive data were also excluded. A lot of times, respondents opened the survey but did not complete it. And the way that shows up in SurveyMonkey is as a completed survey, but once you actually look into it, there was no data in it. And so we excluded all of those responses, and we came up with 1,568 survey data that was usable, that we subsequently used for data analysis. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over some respondent demographics. We gather a lot of information from the respondents regarding their education and training, their work experience, their work setting, where in California they work, and this information we gather just so that we can provide a context for interpreting our analysis results. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through these quickly, but there are a lot of demographics questions, and I put all of these in graphs or charts just so it's easier to see. And these percentages have been rounded just for the ease of my presentation. So this is how long the respondents have been licensed and practicing as an architect. Next slide, please. A lot of them worked for many years before obtaining their license. Next slide, please. And this one is kind of cutting off here their primary work setting, but what the first one, the 75%, says is architecture firm. So most of them work in an architecture firm. Next slide, please. Their primary areas of practice. So a lot of varied experience in the respondents who answered the survey. Next slide, please. And this is just to get an idea of how large their organization is. Next slide, please. Their highest level of education completed. Most requirements, most pathways to licensure do require higher education. However, there are some pathways, from what I understand, that require experience, and some architects do get licensed that way. Next slide, please. Their field of study. Next slide, please. Numbers of hours worked per week. 69% work more than 40 hours a week. Next slide, please. And this is just to get an idea of additional licenses held. About 5% also have contractor licenses. Next slide, please. And this was something more that we were curious about and subject matter experts were curious about. So we put this question on the survey. This is not a demographics question, but we were wondering, it came up in conversations, how many people were using CAD versus BIM versus hand drafting, sketching, and so on. So we did get information on that. Next slide, please. So these are the regions our respondents worked in. Los Angeles County and San Francisco Bay Area were our largest regions. And next slide, please. So, like I was mentioning, for the task ratings, the respondents were asked to rate how frequently they perform each task, and also how important is performing this task to the job of being an architect. So this was the scale that they were given. Ranged from 0, does not apply, I don't perform this task at all, to very often. And then the important scale, this is not important for performing my job effectively, to yes, it's very important. I can't perform my job without this task, essentially. Next slide, please. And similarly, for the knowledge ratings, we asked them how important is having this knowledge for the effective performance of the tasks in your current work. So it ranged from this knowledge is not required to perform my job to it is critically important, wouldn't be able to perform my job without having this knowledge. Next slide, please. So in the occupational analysis, we first come up with the description of practice. The description of practice is the entire practice of an architect in California. These are all the tasks performed by architects in California and all the knowledge required. And so when we send out the survey, we include all the tasks that we came up with during the interviews and all the knowledge statements. And so in this case, we did not delete any of those. And so those tasks and knowledge statements became the description of practice. They included everything an architect does and has to know in California to practice. And based on that, we determined content areas. We essentially just grouped the tasks and the knowledge statements in groups that we call content areas. Next slide, please. And these are the groups or content areas that make up the list of tasks and knowledge statements for the whole description of practice in California. So there are 6 content areas, and we worked with subject matter experts to determine the weights of each content area, meaning the percentage of the profession of architect that's dedicated to performing tasks in that area. So 15% of the job of an architect in California is doing contract development and project planning, and so on. We then used this description of practice and we narrowed it down to those tasks and knowledges that are specific to California practice, meaning what should we ask on the exam. Next slide, please. So based on that discussion of what is actually California specific out of the entire description of practice, we developed the California exam outline. And these are the content areas on that outline. So they're a little bit different. It's 5 content areas on the California exam outline as opposed to 6 that made up the whole description of practice. And the reason for that is because we are trying to move towards asking California-specific items on the exam so that we reduce redundancy between the California exam and the national exam, the ARE. And these weights for the California exam, they reflect the number of items that are dedicated to that item on the exam. So 25 items out of 100 on the exam are on contract development and project planning. Next slide, please. So for the next steps, we are going to implement this new CSC exam outline in March of next year. And the reason it's not going to be until March of next year is because the way we develop the exams here at OPS for the Architects Board is we develop them essentially a year ahead. So all the forms for this year, for 2021, have been developed last fall in workshops with subject matter experts. So we kind of do it a year ahead of time. And so in the fall of 2021, this fall, we're going to develop all the exam forms for 2022, starting with spring, the spring form, which is in March. We are also going to start a national exam review of the ARE. And so we were planning on starting this at the same time as conducting the occupational analysis, but the ARE is also conducting an occupational analysis, and because of COVID, they pushed it back over for almost a year. They've been pushing it back. It was supposed to have been completed by now, and the latest information I have from them is that it will be completed in spring of next year. And so that's another reason why it actually kind of works out for us to implement the new exam outline in spring, because the ARE, occupational analysis, will also be completed in the spring. And so that will allow us to conduct our linkage study, which is where we look at both outlines, the outline from the ARE, the outline from the CSE, and we make sure there are no redundancies. We also are able to identify areas that maybe we need to test on more. We just compare the two exams to make sure that we are covering everything California specific and they're covering everything else. And the final report, I am anticipating to have it completed in June of 2022 for that national exam and linkage study. There's a chance that if the ARE is pushed back even more, we might have to change the timeline a little bit and conduct an additional linkage study. We'll have to see about that, but as of right now, we are preparing to have our final report in June of 2022, and hopefully the ARE occupational analysis will be done by then as well, so that everything is completed by then. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation, and I will open it up to any questions you may have.
Yeah, I assume we will have many questions. I expect a good discussion here. Housekeeping item, I suggest on this item, we raise our hand virtually on the screen, so I can call you one by one. And then I like to start my question first, just as an introduction. Question number one, in addition to staff, which is you and your team, there's a typical composition of the team members, like a few members from maybe active board members and from other committee members. What is the composition of the team working on with you on this work?
Hey, Carol.
Yes, so I am the main OPS test specialist who worked on the occupational analysis. We are always in contact with the board, and the board are the ones who recruit the subject matter experts for us. So the board is in charge of recruiting the subject matter experts and arranging all of their travel and payment. But I am the one who is in contact with the SMEs from then on and conducts all the interviews and sets up all the meetings with them, and conducts all the exam development workshops. And the SMEs are selected by the board. And the final report, I'm the one who develops the final report. We do have several people who look over it, including Heidi, our chief, and also our editors, as well as the board. The board reviews the report as well before it is finalized.
Just a follow-up question, then I will direct the other opportunities to other members. Laura and also Heidi. So these subject experts are generally from our architecture consultants, or our former board members. Where these subject matter experts came from and how they are selected?
They aren't necessarily board members or the architect consultants. So licensing has their own pool of subject matter experts that they've recruited. And Marcus, maybe if you could speak a little bit more on how that is developed.
Yes, so we do select subject matter experts from the pool that we have for exam development, and we don't use board or committee members in the process of selecting the subject matter experts.
Additionally, the subject matter experts have to sign security agreements, and also they sign conflict of interest agreements. And so they certify that they are not educators in the field. They don't teach architecture. They have no affiliation with anything that would be in conflict of interest with developing the exam or the board.
The next question will be from Ron Jones.
Chairman Tian. Ms. Nunn, I guess my question is targeted more towards slides. And I'm looking here at your handout, slides 26 and 27, which basically represented the content subject matters. And I thought it was interesting that from the survey that you took, just the weighted averages from the survey itself and from the actual supplemental exam. For example, construction documents were 22% in one category and only 10% in the other. And whether or not there was anything to be extracted from, and whether or not your analysis basically extracted any meaning in those disparities. And then secondly, I would only point out to the board that two things. One is that the vast majority of the practitioners appear to be in the category of residential architecture, but I think that it also coincides with those members of the practicing industry that oftentimes come before the regulatory and enforcement committee for infractions. And I think there's something to be learned from that as well, and whether or not the exam and the education that we provide them are designed to basically advocate for success in professional practice. So I'll yield the floor to responses.
So I'm going to address the first question about the differences in weights between the description of practice content areas and the CSC content areas. So these are not only based on the work that is going to be California specific. So we also discussed the importance of asking certain things on the California exam. So these weights, they represent the proportion of the exam items on page 27, not only because it is construction documents are 10% of the job, but this is the importance of asking about construction documents on the exam. The subject matter experts felt that other areas were more important in terms of how many questions we should ask on the exam. So the first, on page 26, that one relates to how often construction documents are performed on the job overall. But as far as asking questions on the actual exam, the subject matter experts felt that other areas were more important to test on rather than construction documents. A lot of things are taken into consideration when we determine what should we actually test on. And the big factor is the fact that the licensing exam is supposed to separate those who can practice safely and effectively, and some of the other areas had a little bit more to do with the safety aspects, and the subject matter experts felt that it was more important to ask questions in other areas rather than on construction documents and permitting, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. And my only other comment would be that when in reading the NCARB materials that were distributed as well, what I extracted from that document was that the vast majority of practitioners, particularly residential practitioners, are not commissioned to provide construction administration services during construction, but that's in fact a highly weighted area, but they don't even provide those services. I'll use the floor.
Okay. Next, a question from Neota Serrano.
My only question was, when conducting these surveys, do you get demographic information and educational information on what universities they went to, and so we can follow up on how well they do at those particular schools?
No, we do not ask what university they attended. We could, in the future, we could put it as kind of an open area where they could type it in. We can ask them what educational institutions they attended, and they can type it in. And if you're interested in looking at those responses in the future, we can definitely look into that.
I think that'd be a great idea. And then in demographic information, sex, ethnicity, age, do you collect that data?
No, we do not.
Possible to collect it in the future?
It doesn't really apply to what we're using the demographic questions for, but we can definitely look into that in the future.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question from Sylvia Pong.
Thank you. Mine is actually a comment. I didn't realize I hope it's not me making that noise.
If you're not speaking, please mute.
Oh, okay, thank you. It's a comment. I'm actually really, I guess, informed now of the extent to which the California, the CSE is coordinated, so to speak, with NCARBs, with the ARE, because I had previously thought that California would come up with their own exam because of very specific areas of knowledge that California architects need to know. And for example, we know about seismic and so forth. Everything else like ADA and now COVID, pandemic stuff is all kind of a national issue. So anyway, I'm actually really pleased to see that you coordinate so diligently with NCARB. So can you describe in a little more detail, perhaps, what you do throughout the year? I know you do this I think you said every 5 to 7 years. I'd like to just hear about how you go about it, if you can do it, briefly. Thank you.
Are you referring to the occupational analysis or the national review where we review the ARE?
Yeah, the latter. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we review the ARE we do a national review every time we perform an occupational analysis. And like I was mentioning, the reason for that is to make sure that there are no redundancies, that we are not testing the same thing that the ARE is testing. And so we look at actually not just the linkage between our competencies that we're testing and their competencies that we're testing. We're actually looking overall at their entire process. We ask for their exam development information. How do they administer their exams? What is the process of developing the exams? Who are the subject matter experts that they utilize? How are meetings conducted? We ask very, very detailed information, even at the test sites. How are the proctors trained in administering the exams? We ask for their training manuals. Very detailed information about their entire process, how they come up with their pass points for their exam, how do they determine how many people should pass, how many forms they put out every year, and so forth. It's a lengthy and detailed process, the exam review, the national exam review process. And we, based on that, we also write recommendations to them. We have no, we have no control over they adopt our recommendations or not, but we do give them recommendations. For example, a lot of times at the national level, they will use educators as part of their subject matter experts, and we always make recommendations that is not standard practice, and it is not recommended to use educators as part of your exam development process. That's just an example. We give them detailed recommendations and kind of an overview of what we think about their entire exam. And the linkage to our exam is just part of that, just to make sure that we are not testing the same things they are, and that we're focusing on all the California specific things.
Yeah, a quick follow-up. How many others, can you tell me or tell us how many other states have a supplemental exam?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. I am not sure if anybody else attending does. I don't know how many other states.
Marcus may knows, but that's interesting things to find out, Marcus, if you.
Yeah, just curious. Yeah.
This is Laura. We'll check on this and report it back to you. Hopefully we can find it quickly.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Next question from Pascal. Just again, housekeeping item. If you don't intend to continue your question, you can lower your hand after your question. Pascal, it's your turn.
Thank you. I just want to circle back on Mr. Jones' question and the answers that were provided, as well as the presentation. I understand that on slide page 26, the practice content areas, that represents what an architect has to know to practice architecture in California, whereas the supplemental exam content represents exam content importance. Do I have that right?
Yes. So on page 26, that represents all the tasks that architects perform in California. That includes everything California specific and non-California specific tasks and the knowledge associated with those tasks. On the following page 27, we narrowed it down to only California specific tasks and the knowledge associated with those tasks. Since this is for the California exam, we narrowed it down to only those California specific tasks and knowledge.
Thank you.
Yota, your hands are still on. Do you have a question?
I do not. I do want to, I was trying to talk to the moderator though. I may try another device, my iPad, to see if that works better than my cell phone, just so you know when Neil Cesarano's trying to log in again, it's me. Thank you.
Okay, and hey, Tian, Brett has his hand up, but it's not on the computer. He's got it physically on his screen.
Okay. Now I see him on the computer too. Brett, go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to follow up a question that our communications committee had earlier on a different subject. But what languages is the exam taken in?
The CSC is currently only in English.
Right. Has there ever been any discussion of expanding that to other languages? And have there been requests from students in that regard? Could you hear me?
Yes, Heidi's trying to unmute herself to answer this question.
Sure, take your time.
This is Heidi. There is a process to go through if a board wants to administer an exam in other languages. Typically, there's a code section that says they need to have do an analysis to see if the population, if there's enough people in the population to warrant, offering an exam in another language. I believe it's 5%. So that's something the OPS works with boards to evaluate if that's something the board is interested in. Some of the other licensing exams, for example, barbering and cosmetology, are offered in other languages. Acupuncture is offered in other languages. But as far as I know, architects has never been offered in another language.
Well, I'd like the board to discuss that a little bit. I mean, it's clear to me that in this state, people speaking other languages or other languages, a primary language, would exceed 5%. And so we're in the realm of, you know, of discussing that. The other question I had is, could any of you report on whether there's been a demand for that by students? And if there hasn't been, let's consider polling students in the future, perhaps, or their professors to see if there'd be demand for that.
Brett, I have some involvement as a member of the topics committee. I will give you a quick overview, but just want, Laura, do you want make a remark first before I answer Brett?
Sure. I was going to respond to Sylvia's question about how many jurisdictions offer or require a state-specific exam. It's 13. But on Brett's question about offering it in different languages, that's something staff can research and kind of can look into see what type of requests we've had, what it entails, you know, what it would cost, what some other boards do, and then we could maybe discuss that at strategic planning in September, and we'd have the data to provide you and do some research.
So, Brett, as a member of a longtime member of one of the NCOBS committee to review the foreign architects' qualifications to practice in U.S. And over the past few years, the national level of approach is making the English more more business essential in terms of to understand the law and regulations and the communicating with these key issues. So the national is moving into another direction. Instead of open the door for foreign architects present their work qualifications and through a committee like us to grant them license to practice, now that door is closed. Foreign architects must come in to take architecture exams in its English version. So just let you know. But I think it's a good thing for California Architects Board to into this issue.
May I ask another question?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think our president makes a good point that in terms of health and safety, we want to make sure that, you know, architects can read and understand the language that construction documents and the like are in. So let me ask a related question. When I think one of the earlier slides indicated that there's a kind of psychologists are experts in some portion of the practice of preparing exam materials. And I'm wondering if, when I saw that, I had to wonder if anyone has looked at whether there are any barriers in the exam, either psychologically or culturally. Let's step away from language to certain communities, perhaps communities of color, to succeed in getting through the process.
If I could just make a quick comment, the simple answer is culturally, absolutely. I mean, there's materials and methods of construction that varies from different countries, and so there are going to be some nuances to a exam in California or anywhere in the United States that would be different from somewhere in a foreign country.
Well, I was specifically thinking of minority communities who were born and raised in this country when I was asking. Maybe staff could address that.
This is Heidi. I can address it a little bit. When we select the SMEs, we try to we work with the board to select a sample of SMEs who represent the population of the people who are going to be taking the exam in terms of culture and ethnicity and gender. And we also have editors at OPES who review the items to make sure that they don't use language that would be difficult for people who are taking the exam who don't have English necessarily as their first language. So those are some of the things that we do to try to address cultural differences.
Thank you.
I have Heidi and your staff. I have comments related. One is when we talk about content areas, you listed contract documents, schematic design, project bidding. These are we call this more of a process, business process document, from the beginning of project to an end of project. My question to you is, will our expert who works with you also give you the subject matters practice areas, such as seismic, such as energy conservation, such as resiliencies, and accessibilities? These are part of our experts' contribution to your process, because California does have quite a few focuses, may far beyond other regions of the country. So the question is, do you have these expertise on your team give you subject matters of what's important to California consumers?
We have item writing workshops where we develop new items often, and so that's where we get to that detail, that level of detail that we put into the exam. That is where we write questions on seismic requirements, where we write questions on coastal issues. We do have subject matter experts who work on coastal areas, who do work on areas that are more affected by earthquakes and all throughout California. And so their expertise working with those issues comes into play in item writing workshops where we develop new items. And that is at the forefront, because we are trying to write California specific questions. That is where we write that level of detail, and we put that into the exam.
Okay, good. I have suggestions for our staff, Laura and Marcus, that I think the board should have influence on the subject matters that we believe is important to the California built environment and California consumers, namely natural disasters, earthquakes, energy conservation that is unique to California, important to California. So, Laura, I think this is one of the subjects that I like to incorporate into the strategic session discussion.
John, if I could just ask, what you're asking for the board members to have a say or influence in that area?
That's right. The scope of the technical focus of the exam should also be a part of discussion of the full board.
Okay, I will follow up with OPES. I mean, there are specific requirements that we need to meet for the exam to be, considered valid and legally defensible in terms of who can participate. So I'll have some follow-up discussion with the staff unless you'd like to comment now, and we can report back.
All the members should not necessarily participate in actual activities of the OPES, but in terms of subject matter that is important to California, that should be considered as a part of California supplemental exam. Okay. That topic can be discussed by the board.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's distinguishing. And with that, I have Sunny have a question. Sunny, go ahead.
Yeah, this is kind of where my questions were going. Given what our board has been doing, there's an echo. Can someone take off their phone, please? Or their mute? I can't think straight because of the echo. Okay, I think it's better now. So given what we're doing with the CE hours, it's back again. Brett, I think it's you. I'm so sorry, but can you mute? Thank you. With what we're doing with CE hours, I mean, is it permissible to request that we boost numbers in specific categories based on what the board would like to see and in alignment with some overall strategic goals, for instance, regarding conservation and carbon? So that's my first question, and I have a sort of follow up to that after that, but I don't know who that's to. If it's to
that will be the board and its staff's question. I think, Sunny, that is the best way. And we have next half is the continuing education, and we can and put this into next discussion. But I welcome OPS staff and Laura or answer your question as well.
Yeah, it might help to hear from OPS if they have any thoughts on that topic as to whether we can direct subjects like that.
I'll go ahead and add a second part to my question, because it was actually what I was thinking about first, but then when Tian sort of mentioned that, it sort of cued the follow-up. And so my question is there's a very sort of methodical, survey with a decent amount of practitioners that get us to, what makes up the sort of work process as an architect, and then I get that it's transposed then to the California specific categories. And so I guess my question on that is that like when it's transposed from the typical workday to the California workday, like how large is the consultants that you're using? Like how big of a pool are we sort of sampling, or are we only sampling a very small pool of consultants that sort of get us to that derivative?
Are you referring to the subject matter experts pool that we choose from?
That's correct.
Well, I'm not sure how large the pool that you have on your end is, but I know that we try to include as many licensees as possible from throughout the state. So I think that invitations go out to to thousands. It's just a matter of how many respond and are willing to participate.
Okay, so similar to the broad sweep of all of, for the first survey where you received 7%, you're also sending another inquiry out for people to be part of this second part, this California specific part.
The exam development workshops, where we develop the exam and we write items, those SMEs that are part of that?
Really, I'm going back to slide 27 and what group of the consultants, like what's the how many people are making that decision? The breakdown of 27, like what's the sampling that gets us to slide 27.
Well, so those are developed, I mean, those numbers initially, the initial weights come from the survey. So the number of respondents that you saw responded to the survey. And then in subsequent workshops with subject matter experts, we then refine those weights and we determine the content areas and so forth. So we have, you know, we have several workshops with many subject matter experts from throughout the state in every workshop. So there are a lot of experts working on this and making these determinations.
Okay, I guess that's I kind of just got a little window into this. So I think I was on a NCARB committee briefly for ARE for it sounds like it sounds like you guys have a very similar committee to what they were doing as far as new testing and questioning and all of that. And so I got a little bit of an insight into that, but I just remembered that like we were handed the data, you know, we were handed like the types of questions that we wanted. So I think from just being part of that process briefly, I'm wondering, you know, where the directive and the direction for that data came from. And I get slide 26, it makes total sense, but it's when it's the crossover from standard practice to California practice. I'm also just globally kind of interested in the decision-making process between like California specific issues, which are sort of life safety issues, versus non-life safety California issues. I don't think political is the right word, but just sort of like things that we have here that others don't have. And like, are all of those things making it to, are all of the requirements and the various things that we have in the state of California that are non-life safety requirements, is there a process to make sure that all of those things are being included even if they're non-life safety?
We try to include everything California specific on the exam. The life safety issues are going to be weighted more heavily on the exam.
Got it. Okay.
But we do try to cover everything. Yes.
Okay. So then that leads me just into the next part, which is for the board, and it sounds like we're doing it very similar to the way that the ARE is done, in that the life safety is weighted and that all of our issues are being included. So I do think it's an interesting point that, like, given where we're going as a board with carbon emissions, continuing education requirements, that I don't know if it's even legal or possible, but like if we could ask to have a couple of those types of questions weighted that are in line with current California regulations, seems like that could be on message.
Sure, I think that's board's responsibility. Unless our lawyers or executive directors see otherwise, setting the course, delineate what the concerns California most is certainly part of board responsibility. I have Pascal here. Pascal, go ahead.
Thank you, Tian. Yeah, I just want to offer a very minute snapshot of Sunny's question. And I know from experience that at HMC Architects, we had an employee base of 450 individuals in the profession, and 85 of which were licensed architects up and down the state. And they would, the licensed architects would consistently receive invitations to be subject matter experts. And I know at any given time we would have 5 subject matter experts from HMC on these committees formulating or assisting in formulating exam questions. So that's just a really brief snapshot of what I understand and how they gather the information.
I don't see more questions. Heidi and your team, I have a request. regarding your page 33 and 24, you mentioned the knowledge, the list of the knowledge area, and the list of tasks that you survey. Are these confidential? That it's not practical to share with the board? If they are not, it will be good to maybe in some form to share with the board.
The list of tasks and knowledges should be in the occupational analysis report that you've received, so they're not confidential. And they're also, I believe, or the content areas anyway, they're on the the California Architects Board's website under exam material for the candidate. So they see that as well, so they have an idea of what to study.
Okay, so so these are public information. We can have it. All right. With that, I don't see additional questions. Thank you very much for both of you to give us a detailed update, and we notice the timeline. We will talk more within the board and perhaps have some suggestions that staff will continue to work with you. Okay, thank you again. And we now move next half of the agenda. We'll have Pascal to present the finding of TQC recommendations for revision of continuing education requirements.
I think we're going to get a slide up here. First, an overview. The committee met on October 30th, 2020 and approved actually we met on March 26, 2021 and approved our meeting minutes of October 30th, 2020. We discussed and approved recommendations of a proposed CE framework, continuing education framework, consistent with the 2019-2021 strategic plan objective to amend existing law regarding continuing education requirements for license renewal to reflect the evolving practice of architecture. And the third item we concluded was we voted to approve a recommendation to the board to endorse the intent of Assembly Bill 1010 and collaborate with AIA California regarding mandatory continuing education on zero net carbon design.
Hey, my apology. I'm so sorry, Pascal. I saw a hand from Brett. Brett, oh, you removed? Are you okay? Did I cut you short on questioning? I think he's okay. Okay. Sorry, Pascal, for interruption. Can you resume, please?
Sure, absolutely. I will go through this, I think, briefly and as expeditiously as I can in the best interest of time. The first slide you see is the PQ meeting of March 2021. This slide deck was included as part of your packet, board members, to provide you with an opportunity to formulate your thoughts and perspectives which fulfill the PQ committee's strategic plan charge. Next slide, please. An overview of the committee's charge is an initiative to amend existing law regarding continuing education requirements for licensure renewal to reflect the evolving practice of architecture. Next slide, please. 3 committee findings noted that the benefits of required continuing education and that current requirements are too narrow to keep pace with evolving contemporary practice and position the California architect to best serve consumers. Next slide, please. The committee's assessment to expand learning programs would allow for greater inclusivity of a diversified career architects serving multiple types of consumer interest. Next slide, please. The committee expanded the subject matter topics, would foster a well-rounded practitioner that continues to refine and build upon the minimum levels of competency. I'm going to say that one more time. The subject matter topics would encourage architects to build upon the minimum levels of competency. Next slide, please. The next 5 slides are a draft framework with the objective of establishing the board's consensus for an amendment to the current continuing education requirements. Next slide, please. The draft framework is comprised of 4 subject matter categories. Learning units from each category would total 12 units and align California with the majority of the 55 licensing jurisdictions in the nation. The final committee recommendation amends categories 2 and 3 in the total number of learning units. Next slide, please. Category 1 subject matter reference guidelines include ethics, standards of professional conduct, compliance with laws and regulations governing the practice of architecture, business and risk management, development of service agreements, and construction administration documents. Many of these subject matter topics are at the root of the disciplinary accusations reviewed by the board. And I will add at this point that in the practice analysis, the description of practice content areas, that of the 6 items that are listed in that content area, categories 1 and 4 of these categories that you're going to be presented actually comprise 75% of that content. Next slide, please. Category 2 is a comprehensive learning criteria associated with the many challenging facets of a changing environment, including its impact on human rights and the quality of life degenerated by natural and human-caused hazards. The final committee recommendation is to increase this category's required learning units from 3 to 5 so as to include a wider spectrum of content. Next slide, please. Category 3 directly responds to the PQ strategic plan charge to amend current continuing education. The committee's recommendation is to go beyond barrier-free design with an expansion to be a more inclusive design for a diversified group of people. Examples of universal design that would be addressed by actual design implementation would be in the case of autistic children with learning differences who are impacted by certain colors and loud noises. Another example is people with Alzheimer's and sundowning, which can be comforted with lighting controls that provide a slow transition from high to low color temperatures. The final committee recommendation is to increase this category from the required learning units from 3 to 5, as noted, to not disrupt the current regulation, but to expand the content. Next slide, please. Category 4, the subject matter topics reference guidelines include the development of skill sets in communicating design ideas, cost estimating and budgeting, establishing sustainability goals and building performance, determination of applicable building zoning governing regulations and ordinances, and historic preservation. Next slide, please. The summary framework. The final recommendations here would be that the categories 2 and 3 be 3 to 5 learning units with a total of, category 1, 3 units, category 2, 5 units, category 3, 5 units, and category 4, 3 units, equaling 16 continuing education units for license renewal. This 4-category continuing education framework allows California's diverse architects with a flexible selection of subject matter topics they would deem most relevant to the project type as well as the interest of their target consumer stakeholders. They serve to keep the pace with an evolving practice of architecture. There was an expressed concern at the committee that perhaps there wasn't sufficient empirical data that would initiate or substantiate that continuing education was required by California architects. But on the very first day of this committee's meeting, to set our compass to meet the charge that was provided by this strategic plan, we reflected on the words of Eric Hoffer, which say, "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." In summary, the PQ framework recommendations represent an amendment to existing law to reflect evolving practice in architecture. The framework is flexible, non-prescriptive, and allows for architects to selectively fulfill their lifelong learning to best serve their consumer clients. I can't go without thanking the committee and naming them publicly here. Raymond Chang, Betsy Doherty, Glenn Gall, Kirk Miller, Steve Sands, Stephanie Silkwood, and our own boards, Tian Feng, Malcolm Gladstone, and Charles Sonny Ward. Without their dedication, ideas, participation, and patience, today's body of work would have not been allowed to be presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal. I expect some discussions as well. I just want to lead the conversation. It was really nearly 2 years of work in making. And in process, we also see initiative from AIA that even more reinforce that the industry is looking into expanding or modernizing our current continuing education requirements. So I think it's critical for the board to take the leadership and provide the direction. So after the strategic plan, we can formulate a plan moving forward. So that said, any comment on this subject will be very helpful, because between now and the strategic session, we will not have additional PQ committee meetings. So anyway, anyone have any thoughts? I see Sylvia is ready to come in. Sylvia?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Well, Pascal, this is a culmination, I believe, of a few years of our discussions on the board of wanting to expand CE in California, but really not knowing a path. We were told previously that the impediment to either expanding or changing of these CE requirements was rested with the legislative process. And I saw that firsthand when Laura and I attended the Sunset meeting, at which I believe it was the sponsor of the legislation wanted to ensure that the CE credits for ADA was not tampered with. So over the years, we've been hesitant to make any changes, and I really applaud the committee and your leadership as well, Pascal, on making this very, very logical and much needed set of new CE standards. I really applaud you for doing this, and I hope that you all have figured out a path to ensuring its passage, because I believe, if I'm not incorrect, I believe it still does have to go through a legislative process, perhaps not. Maybe you can respond to that, the process by which this will be approved.
Yes, I'll defer to Laura on the process. It is legislative, but I think we do have a foundational document that can take us there. So I'll defer to Laura on this.
Yeah, okay. Laura, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, so you referenced impediments. They are still there. So this is a framework that the committee would like to see and the board may want to see. I suggest maybe we talk about it further in strategic planning. There is still the whole process of implementation. We would need to go to the legislature. And by the time the board went, there are points for the board to consider and information we would need to provide if we're going to try to do that.
It would seem to me that perhaps we need a new sponsor. rather than going through the original sponsor who really was focused on the whole accessibility issue. This is, of course, 4 times that. What do you think about that idea? Is that a possibility of going to a new sponsor?
Well, we definitely would have to find a member of the legislature who's willing to take it. The author of the disability access proposal is not in the legislature anymore. There is still the issue of whether we try to touch that existing requirement. The sponsor of that requirement is still very active. It would likely have concerns whether if we try to modify the existing requirement.
And this does not. That's what I'm seeing, is that this does not really modify it. It increases. Well, I guess it does modify because it's going to universal design rather than just accessibility. But, you know, if we can talk to that legislator and figure out a way to convince that, you know, that it's an expansion, not, you know, not diluting it.
We have Pascal, then after that, Brett has comment.
Yeah, just a brief statement that the committee, after their discussions, we concluded that it would be not a good move to try and limit the current law on accessibility, but more so, we thought it was also very important to expand its content to include a more diversified group of individuals that incur challenges beyond barrier-free design. So that was the thinking there.
So this is in principle, it is an enhancement to accessibility, not an impediment. Yeah, Brett, please go ahead.
Yes, we had a committee discussion about the AIA's role in legislation that would, you know, create some of our categories as requirements, and I would like someone to address that, and also I wonder whether we can find out if there are legislatures who are architects who might be interested in being a co-sponsor with the person whose name I forget that Laura alluded to, that initiated the discussion here of his discussion or her discussion of expanding the ADA subject matters. So that's 2 comments or questions.
I had experience just recently on this subject, so we may have a benefit at the public comment period. If Mark Christian is still with us, he can shed some light for us. And but before we conclude this topic, I see Pascal's hand again, and then Laura, you may want to give a final thoughts before we open public comment. Pascal, go ahead.
So just briefly, with regards to Category 2, climate change, we know that there's Assembly Bill 1010, which by definition is net zero carbon design. The next step moving forward, I would think, is going to involve work with the AIA California to find some common ground so that perhaps AB 1010 can be expanded into a broader spectrum to include the subject matter topics which so much are part of climate change, and it's not just zero net carbon, but there's other aspects of climate change that are impacting those on Earth. And so I hope we can get to some more common ground, and maybe there's an amendment there. I don't know what the outcome of that collaboration is going to be, but it's definitely a bridge that needs to be gapped. And I'm going to put in a plug for somebody at this moment. I'm taking advantage of this moment that I have the mic. And on June 20th, which is the summer solstice in San Francisco, specifically Ocean Beach, an artist by the name of Ana Teresa Fernandez is exhibiting an art exhibit there, which is comprised of 15 pillars of plexiglass that are 6 foot high, and they're going to be filled with seawater. The intent of the exhibit is to walk through the exhibit and experience what 6 feet of sea rise is going to mean by the year 2050. And there'll be storytellers there that'll be able to talk to children to kind of provide information in a very non-threatening way about how important this is and how we have to start doing something about it collectively, not only as a state, but as a nation and as a planet. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Brad, it's your hand. It was the old one or new one? Laura, any last thoughts before I open to public comment?
No, I will. I think Mark Christian is here and would like to comment. I think I won't speak for them as to whether they'd look to make any amendments to AB 1010. So I think we can, as the board moves forward with this, if they so choose, we can, I think in strategic planning and later this year can talk a bit further about the idea and then, the process it would need to go through.
Thank you. I do see Mark Christian still is patiently sitting in his chair listening to us, and that he would speak up if I open a public forum. Moderator, can we open public forum for item H, please?
I have one comment, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead. Jump in.
So we won't have to take any action. There's no need for a motion before we go to public comment. Just want to make sure of that.
No, good question. Unless you feel what my suggestion is, we will moving this entire report to a strategic session, and we will massage and formulate something for board to work on.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moderator, please resume the public session, a comment session.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to request public comment, please follow the instructions currently being displayed on your screen. You will be provided 2 minutes. Our first individual who has requested public comment is from an individual identified as Mark Christian. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. Hello, board members. Mark Christian with the American Institute of Architects, California. President Feng, I heard several questions or comments I might be able to respond to. I will start with AB 1010. First, AI California certainly would like to work with the California Architects Board should it adopt this as a continuing education formula that it would like to proceed with to have enacted in state law. It certainly is in many ways consistent with prior AIA California Board of Directors actions from like 10, 15 years ago or so, about having a comprehensive continuing education requirement as a condition of relicensure in California. For AB 1010, which just earlier this week passed the Senate Business Professions Committee and is on its way to the Senate floor, I believe it's too late in the process for AB 1010 to be amended. If it were to be amended, we'd want to have done that prior to the Senate Business and Professions Committee hearing and vote. An amendment such as this would be very substantive and would probably have it required to go back to the committee. I really don't think the author of the bill would be interested in entertaining doing that. The author would like the bill to proceed forward. I believe that this is would require, where we are in the legislative process, would probably require legislation in a different year. I don't think this legislative session where we are right now is a good year to do this. That's my opinion.
Time had been reached. There are no additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Mr. President, before we close that feature, I think we should at this point also take public comment for item H1, which was the presentation by OPES. My sense is that we were going to take all public comment at the end of item H, but having taken comment on number 2, we should probably ask for comment on item 1 as well.
Okay, but Mike, I was intent to the comment period was designed for entire H, but I can reopen again for H1 if you feel necessary. Okay, moderator, please open public forum again on H1. And by the way, Mark, Christian, if you're welcome to use that comment period as well if you have not finished your sentence.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, the public comment session is still open. If you would like to request public comment, please click on the question mark within the square and type "I would like to comment." Our first public commenter for this session comes in from Mark Christian. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief for this time. President Feng, I don't know if there's any other questions that the board would like me to answer. I believe Commissioner Gladstone had a question, but I defer to you.
Looks like he is still interested. Brad, continue. Quick.
Yes. Did I hear our president say that we're going to discuss in a later portion of this meeting or at a future meeting the subject of finding a sponsor during the next legislative cycle?
It's in the strategic session. We will review and acting on GQC's recommendation on continuing education.
Thank you.
This is the moderator. At this time, we do not have any additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please.
Feature has been closed.
Board members, it's 12:15. I suggest we take a quick break and come back, finish the rest of items.
Tian, it's Nilsa. I can't figure out how to raise my hand. It's not working on my iPad. I just like to discuss, it's just a comment on the summary draft of CE framework. On the continuing education units, there is a typo, I believe. On the form, it says 3, 3, 3, and 3, but I heard the scale say 3, 5, 5, and 3. Is that correct? On the categories.
Perhaps we can pull up the final slide.
Yeah, the slide says 333, but I think we'll go with the document. And it will not make substance difference during the strategic session because the full board can make the recommendation then.
If I can, Tian.
Okay, yes, please.
The slide deck that was in the packet was basically the agenda for the PQ committee. It was not the final recommendations of the PQ committee. I just wanted to make that note. That's why we went to 3, 5, 5, and 3 as a final recommendation.
This is Laura. We can send out or provide at the September meeting the revised plan.
Thank you. Not necessary, just wanted to bring it up. Thank you.
Now it's 12:17. What is your preference? You want a long break or short break? Is 12:30 too soon? Anyone want just to go ahead and make anywhere from 12:30 to 12:45. Whoever speaks first, I will follow that person's request.
That's fine.
12:45.
Go ahead.
12:45.
12:45. That's it. We will. The meeting in recess. We'll come back at 12:45.
Tian?
Yes.
Tian, I have a very quick note. I do have to leave at 1 o'clock, but I will be back. after that.
Okay.
I hope to be gone only 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, have a good lunch.